Of vehemence, it seems to me, that's directed at me, directed at the president. You know, people talk about taking their country back. You know, I can't look into people's hearts, look into people's minds, but it seems to me that this president has been treated differently than others. There's a certain racial component to this for some people. I don't think this is the thing, is a main driver, but for some, there's a racial animus.
Attorney General Eric Holder is the man charged with upholding the laws of this country. In the minds of many, this is a task that needs to be undertaken by someone who remains above the fray. But A.G. Holder has proven himself to be someone who does not believe in staying silent nor being a middleman in the road and just waiting and arbitrating. His comments recently about racial animus toward himself and President Barack Obama are merely the tip of his inciting iceberg, seen now by more than a few as being slightly unhinged. Welcome to MidPoint, former U.S. Attorney Joe DiGenova, to weigh in on the current actions of our top cop. Joe, thanks so much for joining us today.
Delighted to be with you.
Joe, let's start right out with this. Some people are saying, wait a minute, he is the Attorney General. He is a man in power. Nothing wrong whatsoever with the Attorney General speaking out as he did. To which you would answer,
well, because he is the Attorney General, he must be careful about the words he uses and the way he uses them. I think that any normal person who had been in government as long as Eric has been and has had as many jobs as he had would have learned by now that this type of incendiary rhetoric, which is baseless in fact, which is the worst part of it, is simply unacceptable for a senior government official. Eric is the African-American Attorney General of the United States, now going into his second term. He works for the African-American President of the United States, who was elected twice by the American people, although with fewer votes in the second election for the first time in American history. The bottom line is that his statements are almost paranoid. That neither the president nor the attorney general has been treated differently than any other president or any other attorney general. It's as if they don't think there's any basis for any criticism of them at any time. This is called politics. When you are in power and you do things, you're going to be criticized for it. The president's skin color and the attorney general's skin color have absolutely nothing to do with the criticism of them. A case in point, the IRS investigation. Any attorney general worth his salt would have never appointed a person who is a high donor to the Obama campaign to be the lead so-called career attorney investigating this criminal case. So for him to think that criticism of him and the president has some sort of racial animus to it is not only silly, it's simply unhinged. It's nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't some racists out there who don't like them because they're black. I'm sure there are. But this is about politics and governing, and it's quite clear that both the Attorney General and the President are not very good at governing, and people are telling them that, and they don't want to hear it. You know, this president was raised in a world of adulation, of telling him that he's wonderful and perfect. When he was first elected, we used to call him the baby Jesus because people were tiptoeing around, afraid to say anything about him. We're long since past that now, and even the media is finally waking up, although too late to be of any value. But that's where we are.
Joe, I once again want to point out that you very rarely speak your mind. You really don't tell people exactly how you think. I want to show them some of your comments on WMAL radio in Washington, and allow us to quote you, if you will, and for the audience here to see this. These comments are stupid, they're silly, they're churlish, they're childish, they're sophomoric. This is faculty lounge crap. Joe, really please, next time you're on the show, I want you to be just a little bit more open and make sure that you get it off your chest here. But in all this, and we understand this, and there is anger about this, you use the word racist, though. Let's deal on that for a moment. Is it not fair to say, though, that there are people who simply do not like the president and do not like the attorney general simply because they're African American?
I think there are people like that, but I think they are so infinitesimally small that it's politically irrelevant, and it has nothing to do with the criticism of them, which is what this discussion is about.
Is it almost to say that if he is upset about the criticism that he is receiving, that he brought it on himself?
Well, there's no question that both the president and the attorney general are responsible for the criticism that they are receiving. In foreign policy, the president's performance has been below Jimmy Carter level. I mean, it is so subpar as to be in a submarine beneath the ocean. And it's just silly to note or to suggest that the criticisms of them are founded on anything else other than policy differences, whether it's immigration, law enforcement, Fast and Furious, Benghazi. I mean, the list goes on. The IRS, targeting of conservatives, it doesn't matter what it is. There's plenty of legitimate stuff here for the people to be concerned about. The president, for example, decided that he's going to become the assassin-in-chief by assassinating American citizens on foreign fields without due process. Now, the Attorney General of the United States, in defense of the president, says, well, you're not entitled to due process of a court when you're an armed combatant. You're entitled to the best due process that's available in deciding whether or not to kill you when the president sits there with his kill list. Now, anybody who knows anything about the way this country functions know that people are going to have reasonable differences with them over whether or not this is a good policy to be killing Americans with drones overseas, and even in war zones. But they don't accept that. They say that people who question that have got something wrong with them.
Okay,
I think this shows a political immaturity that is truly staggering.
let's stay on the race card here, because that's a phrase that is so often used anymore. I think we have to go back and we have to find out exactly where that started. But the race card word itself, why is it that the Attorney General has decided to play this card as often as he has?
Because he's a Democrat, and that's what Democrats do. This is about the Democratic Party, which, of course, as you know, is the party of racism, the party of Jim Crow, the party of separate but equal, the party that started segregation in the South. They are the people who held up the great civil rights pieces of legislation in the 1960s. It was the Republicans who saved civil rights legislation. The Attorney General, who has a personal connection to the civil rights movement through his family, displays a type of ignorance and political naivete. It's almost as if he has learned nothing from all the years that he's been in Washington. This has nothing to do with racism. The president and the AG have sought to make it about that as a terrible defense of their conduct. There's no evidence that there's any racism. I mean, even the horrible New York Times criticizes them from time to time. I mean, that doesn't mean, God forbid, that there should ever be a racist person at the New York Times. This is a hollow argument. It's the last bastion of a scoundrel. It sounds stupid because it is stupid. This is what the American people don't like about this president. They know they're being gamed by a street urchin.
Let's get into the actual job itself, the Attorney General. You've been in this seat before. You've been in this legal seat many times here. The Attorney General, the top cop in the United States. There are those who would say it is within his purview. It is all right for somebody like this to bring these things to note, whether or not they think it's right or wrong, but to say something. There are others who will go the exact opposite. They'll say, look, this is the Attorney General. He needs to be quiet unless he's doing something that it was in the rule of law here and basically not taking a side. Where do you fall?
Well, I don't have any problem with the Attorney General or the President bringing up issues related to race when they are legitimate and they are related to a specific thing. This was a smear of an entire group of people, unnamed, you'll note. This is the worst type of defense of yourself. We've been treated differently, is what he's saying. That is utter nonsense. That is faculty lounge crap. They have not been treated differently. This president has been treated differently only in this sense, in that he has been anointed as almost saint-like, and it is only recently that the press has begun to ask questions. For example, I noted recently this silly complaint by this international journalist organizations that the administration is not transparent and they're not getting enough access. Where the hell were these people? All of a sudden they've noticed this? I mean, this is idiotic. The journalists, by the way, who scream for a shield law, I used to be in favor of one, not anymore. Not the way these guys are performed. They're part of the government. The mainstream media has become nothing more than a flack for the President of the United States. And for the Attorney General to complain about his treatment, my goodness, I haven't noticed any bad articles about him. They may complain about a decision, but for heaven's sakes, I don't even know what he's talking about.
I want to bring this up to Brad Thore, is the author of The Act of War, and he had his time on the Glenn Beck program talking about his book. But instead of pitching the book, he decided to respond to Eric Holder. Here's that sound.
Mr. Holder, the one true racist in this dialogue is you. You see everything through the prism of race. You are the racist. You are using racism to cover up the inadequacy of the performance of the President of the United States and the absolute dereliction of duty in your office. You, sir, are the racist.
Is that it, Joe? Just a smokescreen, and basically that's what politicians from every side play. They try and smokescreen whatever they've got, whatever's bad going on, find something else to cover it up?
Well, I think that the use of the racist by the Attorney General was a terrible mistake. It's absolutely wrong. There's no basis in fact for his accusation. I think that he and the President both are on the defensive. They're on the ropes. The Attorney General's performance, for example, in running the department and not conducting what most of us consider to be legitimate investigations, not conducting those legitimate investigations like the IRS, really has presented a picture not only of incompetence, but of an over-politicization of the legal process. I think this Justice Department is going to go down in history as the most political Justice Department in the history of the United States.
As a former U.S. attorney, on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you give Eric Holder and his department and their performance?
I give him a 2 at best.
I'm shocked, actually, Joe, that you went to a 2. I was really expecting something
I'm
subterranean.
being polite to an old. Eric is actually an old friend, but I'm sure I'm not going to be his friend anymore. But I love the guy, but he's not done well as Attorney General, and he has not acquitted himself well in the last 48 hours.
20 seconds left. Any surprise whatsoever that the President has not had any response to all of these comments?
Well, I find it interesting that the President has not made it known that he's distancing himself from the comments like he did earlier when Eric made his famous speech at the DOJ when he was sworn in about how Americans were cowards. I've got news for Eric. Americans are not cowards. They're brave. They went to Normandy. They went down to Mississippi in the civil rights movement. Americans are very brave in fighting racism, and he's wrong, and he should be ashamed of himself.
I think you might be right. I dare say that the two of you won't be sharing bagels and coffee anytime soon. But then again, in Washington, stranger things happen. That always happens. There, former U.S. Attorney Joe DiGenova. Thanks so much for joining us, Joe. We'll do it again.
A pleasure, anytime.
All right, take care. Coming up next, someone needs to explain why the Republicans are heading to Cleveland for their national convention, and we have someone who hails from Ohio who wants more than a simple answer. It's right here on MidPoint.